And welcome to Chapter and Verse. For our second week in a row, we have David Barton with us. David Barton is our nation's foremost Christian historian. And he's with a group called Wall Builders, which has provided us information about not only the original intent of our founders, but also about how the founders mean to communicate with us today, about some of the issues which we feel are contemporary, but are not all that completely contemporary. David, say a little bit about yourself and Wall Builders.
Wall Builders is a name that we take from the Bible book of Nehemiah, and it deals with getting people involved in their communities, to rebuild their communities. We're kind of unique in that we have a collection of about 100,000 documents from before 1812. So we have thousands of the handwritten documents of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and all these guys. It's a cool library because it helps us know exactly what they intended in different areas. So we got all these documents out of black history, out of church history, out of constitutional history, judicial history, military history, whatever the issue is. There's very few things we deal with today that haven't been dealt with in previous generations, so we can really get the wisdom and experience of previous. We don't have to stub our toe on the same rock they kicked earlier. Yeah. And we can learn from their experience. Technology may change, but really the issues don't change.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that Rhode Island had a state church, as did Massachusetts and as did Maryland. Rhode Island had a state church, and this was after the Constitution.
Yeah, nothing in the federal Constitution was intended to do that because it limited only the federal government. Out of the 13 original colonies, 9 had state churches, and that was fine. A lot of them, like Massachusetts, had a state church till 1820. So we're talking 31 years after the First Amendment's in place, you still have state churches because the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. It doesn't say the states. States could do what they want. Congress couldn't do it. What they didn't want was what they had in Great Britain, which was a national church where everybody's going to be Catholic or Anglican or Baptist or Presbyterian or anything else at all. That's what they didn't want. That's why it was fine to have a state church here in Rhode Island, as in Virginia. Now, Virginia, they just established theirs in 1777. That was one of the things, and a lot of the states did that early on. Once they separated from Great Britain, they didn't want that state church. Yeah. Even in Massachusetts, where you still had a state-established church, they allowed every other church, and that's what the Church of England did not allow. I mean, when they were there, they were the only church. You couldn't have others. So down in Virginia, where you had the Church of England, if a Baptist preached, he was in trouble. He'd be thrown in prison because he wasn't an Anglican. A Quaker would get killed in Virginia for that. So even though there were other states with state-established churches, they provided free exercise for every religion, every denomination. That's why here in Rhode Island, even with the state church, you had Jews here in 1654 and synagogues built. We had Muslims in America from 1619 on. We had first Hindu temples built in 1800. I mean, so you'd still have Christian denominations established, but they didn't use what Great Britain had done, and that was penalize people of other faiths. So we had a very different view. It really wasn't a hostile view after the Revolution. I mean, we really went to a lot of liberty, a lot of freedom.
Did the founders have any ideas about the media in those days?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, early on, one of the things they did, Sam Adams, the father of the American Revolution, said, you know, you really can't trust the media. They're all biased. They're all British sympathetic.
It's so true. It's so true.
So they started their own internet, and their internet were called the Committees of Correspondence. Yeah. And the Committees of Correspondence is the way that they communicated with each other. It's what we today call viral marketing. Yeah. And Committees of Correspondence, you'd write things out, you put it on horseback and send it to all the other towns, and the patrons would get together and read it and say, here's the latest email blast, is what it amounted to. So they did that because they did not trust the media. They didn't like the media, and that's how you get around the media. That's how we get around the media today, is email and internet and talk radio and other things.
And occasionally a Glenn Beck show.
Yeah, that's right. That's a way around, because that's that talk radio. It's also a TV program, but it goes viral, and, you know, it comes out on YouTube after he does it. And so regardless of what mainstream media may say, you've got other alternatives now. And that's what they wanted back in the American Revolution, because the British pretty much controlled the press, and that's not good for the American cause.
What do you think about the state of our country right now in terms of our responsiveness our ability to respond to these debates and issues. The media, some of the media are trying to do our part, although much of the media does seem to have a bias. I agree.
Oh, they do.
I agree.
Well, and that's one of the, Rothman and Lichter have done studies for years just on the media,
yeah,
and looking at the value system. And what's interesting with the media is, if you take America, which is about 40% Republican, about 40% Democrat, and about 20% independent swing in the middle, media is not there. Media, you have about 7% Republican, you have about 90% that are Democrat, and you have about 3% who are independent. And that doesn't look like the American people. In American circles, about 24% of Americans are evangelical. Find evangelicals and ABC, NBC, CBS, any evangelicals come? No. And that is one of the, they don't look like America in virtually any area. Whereas you have about 51% of the nation that opposes abortion and 77% that want restrictions on abortion. You have about 85% of the media that wants no restrictions on abortion. That's almost mirror opposite. Where any given year you're going to have about 70% of Americans go to church at least once a year. With the media, 90% of media has not been in church once in the last 10 years. So you really do have a different value system there. The Rothman-Lichter study pointed out that not only do you have, there's 250 what they call bureau chiefs. These are the guys in Washington, D.C. that send out the national news to all the local papers, etc. And they found that in that particular group, 68% of the guys in the media said that they felt like they had a moral responsibility to convert Americans to their viewpoint. Wow. So they're not even trying to be neutral on stories. They're trying to say, here's my viewpoint, I want you to believe like me. And I will say that I'm in the national news a lot, and it's interesting that recently in what we did in Texas in trying to create our history standards down there, the history standards really went against where media wanted to go. Yeah. We were very positive toward faith. We showed the faith of the Founding Fathers. We revered the founding documents. We had students memorize sections of the Declaration. We taught the free market economic system. Yeah. Those are all things opposed. And it got so hostile that as New York Times and Washington Post, MSNBC, ABC, all these national news did stories on me, they didn't even call me to get my response to the story. And usually they'll at least call me to try to misquote me, get something they can misuse. They didn't even care what the second side of the story was. They just took every press release from the other side and just ran them as though they were fact. So they weren't even trying to get a second opinion, and usually when you write about someone, you at least give them a chance to respond. They didn't do that. So it really is a value-laden institution. That's why right now the media has the lowest rating it has had in our lifetime. Only 23% of Americans feel like the media gives fair news. Now, when you get into individual stations, CNN is the highest on trustworthiness. Fox is right there within 1%, and then everything else drops way down after that. So you get to ABC, NBC, MSNBC, they're all down almost in single digits on trustworthiness. But overall, general media, print media, and broadcast media is about 23% of Americans is all that trust the media, and that's a good indication that Americans are smart enough to realize there's a bias in most media.
Media seems to be is slipping now. It seems to be on the ropes.
Well, it's interesting. Alternative media is exploding. Yeah. The traditional media, which is your newspapers, I mean, they're going under. New York Times is going under. Traditional newspapers have closed because they no longer reflect the values of the people that read them. I mean, I quit subscribing to my paper in Texas years ago because they didn't have anything that reflected what I believed. And so why do I want to read something that makes me mad every day? And that's where people are. And these guys are trying to figure ways to prop it up. But what has exploded are the news sources on the internet. People are going to the internet for news because they get a much more accurate picture, much less bias. It's just stories. And so media is not in trouble. It's just traditional media that's in trouble. The broadcast and the print media. The alternative media with talk radio, where the people have to pay to play, if you will. I mean, talk radio stays on the air because you get advertisers who are willing to pay money, but you only get advertisers because people are listening to talk radio. Well, that tells you where people are wanting. They're hearing things that communicate with their own values. And so it's not that the media is in trouble, it's the traditional media is in trouble. Media is doing really well in internet and talk radio and alternative.
Students don't seem to know very much about, well, a lot of subjects, a lot of subjects, including history, including civics. What can be done about that?
You know, there's an interesting study that was done by University of Connecticut. They called it the Coming Crisis in Leadership. And they said that because we all know that students who are going through school right now are going to be our leaders in 20 years. I mean, that's just the way it's always been. That's the way it was at the time of the Founding Fathers. That's why the Founding Fathers got so into education. Once they won the American Revolution, they said, you know, the only way that the principles we just secured are going to exist is if we teach them the next generation. So you'll find that in the 10 years after the American Revolution, more colleges and universities were started in America than the 150 years before the Revolution. I mean, the Founding Fathers themselves, George Washington started schools and did policies, and nearly every founder did something. So with that same kind of framework, you come to where we are today. University of Connecticut said that they have what's called negative learning. They track students now that have come into what they call the elite institutions, you know, the Ivy League schools. They come in as a freshman, they go out as a senior, and on the testing right now, in the 4 years, they're going out as a senior knowing less than when they came in. They're actually losing. You're spending $250,000 and knowing less when you go out. They call that negative learning. That's why they call it the coming crisis in leadership. So when you see what's happening here, that does not bode well for the future. To have students who know less and knowledge is dropping, you get a great degree, $250,000, but you know less than when you. This is not healthy. It's not good. And so what's happened is we've gotten away from teaching education and it's become indoctrination. If anyone is curious about that, every year the National Education Association has their annual conference and they pass resolutions. Read their resolutions. None of them deal with education. All the rest of that, they don't deal with, hey, we got to have stronger math standards, we got to do better in history, we got to do better in government policy. They say, no, we want same-sex marriage. Oh, by the way, we also want cap and trade. Oh, by the way, we want open borders and immigrant. It's all political stuff. Yeah. And so that's what education has become, is it has very little to do with actually learning something. It's being indoctrinated with political views.
Did the Connecticut report have any prescriptions?
No, not really. It's interesting that it's pretty easy to find out, excuse me, where the problem, excuse me, where the problems are. One of the things that comes out every year is U.S. News and World Report does their report on the elite colleges and universities. They take the top 55 schools. One of the things they report is there is not a single university in the elite 55 that requires any course in American history for graduation. You go through 4 years of college, you will not learn one thing about American history. They said that 80% of those schools do not require any course in history, world history or European history, anything else. So that's why we have trouble with history. We have no idea who we were. We keep making the same mistakes today that we made 50 years ago, 70 years ago, because we have never studied history. That's a problem. Geography is a problem. We have 90% of graduating seniors that cannot find either Afghanistan or Iraq on a world map. Grab this. 25% of graduating seniors in Texas cannot identify the nation that borders Texas on the south and don't even know how to find Mexico. You had 50% of students graduating from school that cannot find New York, Mississippi, or Ohio on a United States map. I mean, we're paying $17,000 a year for 12 years of school, and we can't even find states on the U.S. map, and then we're going to university and we're paying $250,000, we're getting nothing in history, nothing in government. And so that's the real problem. It's the philosophy of education shifted. So it's not just what the University of Connecticut found, because they're at the tail end of this process. It has to start back here at kindergarten and start a different process. One of the things that we had to deal with in Texas with the standards there was the philosophy that was inculcated. 240 teachers wrote the standards, then we have to review them and change them. The first line in the first standard for kindergarten, first line in the first standard for first grade, etc., was we want to teach our students how to be good global citizens. We said, wait a minute, why don't we start with being a good American citizen, you know? And so there is nothing on our country, our nation, our history, our government, our philosophy, our economy. There's nothing on any of that. And that's where things have to change. I will say that I've seen a very wholesome pushback in the right direction. Textbooks are starting to change. But when you start changing textbooks, it's going to be 25 years before you see the fruits of that. So what we're doing right now, what we're seeing coming out of university, is the result of textbooks that were written 25 years ago. We're starting to change that process, but it may be some more years before we actually see that. And the other thing we have to do is we have to get some new university professors. Polling, the only group in America that is further off from we the people than the media is university professors. They're more biased than the media is. It's unbelievable the number of lawsuits we're having to file against schools just to get them to allow students to express their own views in a class. It's unbelievable. Students can't express their own views in a college class. So there are now a number of legal groups that have been raised up in the nation. They do nothing but litigate on students' free speech rights in the classroom because we no longer have that right for most kids. If you happen to be a kid that believes in traditional values or loves America, you're going to get your brains beat in a classroom. But it's changing. I mean,
it's changing.
I don't mean to make that sound pessimistic because it's not.
That was my next question.
I've got more optimism for America than I've had in 30 years.
Really?
I see more things going right. Now, it's not things that we're going to see in the next 6 months and 12 months, but the standards we got in Texas. And I keep saying Texas, and I need to explain that the standards passed in Texas will be the standards used in all 50 states because textbook is the largest, the textbook market for Texas is the largest. Publishers make their money back by selling their textbooks in Texas. Then after they make their money, they take that textbook to all the other 49 states. So what we do with standards in Texas will be the textbooks that are used here in Rhode Island as well.
Yeah.
And why that's significant is these are the best standards I've seen in a public school textbook since World War II. I mean, it's a really good throwback. It's a love of country. It's a knowledge of our documents. It's a knowledge of American exceptionalism, what makes us operate. But the deal is, we finished these standards about 3 weeks ago. Well, it's going to take them 3 years to write the textbook. Then the textbook get in the classroom in about 4 years. Then you're going to have to go through 12 years of school. So we're talking 16 to 18 years before all the stuff in those textbooks get into the culture. And then 10 years after that before those kids get elected to office and start doing things. So we're talking 30 years from now, but it's in the pipe coming down. And I keep up with polling nationally. We've been watching tens of thousands of polls for the last 20 years, particularly cultural polls. And right now, America's in better shape on cultural issues than it's been in 20 years. I mean, we are more traditional. We want to go more back to traditional values than we have in 20 years. Now, policy's not there yet, but the people are there yet. And so the changes I'm seeing in the people, the changes I see that'll be showing up now in the next 10, 15 years, I'm really positive, really optimistic for what I see coming in the country. The kids too. I love the kids. You know, it's really fun with the kids because you look at the kids. I'll give you two examples. Nationally, 51% of the nation says that it's pro-life, and 77% of the nation wants restrictions on abortion. So only 24% of the nation wants Roe v. Wade, untouched, abortion on demand for any cause. People are saying, no, we don't want partial birth or whatever. So only 51% of the nation is pro-life. You know, with our teenagers, 72% are pro-life. Now, how did teenagers get to be 20% more pro-life than their parents, their teachers, the culture? Same thing with the generation before our teenagers. We call that the millennials. They were born in the 80s. So you look at the millennials. The largest study ever done on millennials was done out of New York City by a marketing group because they want to get the money from they want to find out how to buy the cars. And they found in polling these kids, millennials, the entire generation, 94% of those kids respect monogamy and parenthood. 88% respect the Constitution, 86% respect the military, 84% respect marriage, only 24% respect Hollywood. Now,
is that right?
You're talking about a whole generation where 88% respects the Constitution. We don't have 88% of Congress who respects the Constitution. This is good news for what's coming.
Well, what's the name of that report?
That report was, oh gracious, I forget the name of the report. I have it on my computer. We download. It's a great report, and they use it now. And if you watch the way that the ads are going for that generation, you read those, you watch those ads, you say, hey, that's just traditional value stuff. And that's what we grew up with in the 50s and the 40s, and it's back. So it's good.
Those are positive signs.
Yeah, those are really positive signs.
anymore?
Well, there's good stuff out there in a lot of ways. The growth of people who are committed to their faith is really good. The growth of people who are committed to learning about the countries. I love the fact that bestsellers now in the New York Times list are history books like John Adams and in 1776 David McCullough.
Yeah.
Isn't it weird that we're willing to pay good money to learn what we should have learned in school? All the stuff McCullough did is what we used to learn in school. But we're so hungry for our own history that we're paying good money to make books #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's what we're supposed to be getting in school. Hey, that's really good, that we want to know who we are as a people. We're willing to spend good money to learn something we should have already known, but that's a positive sign. I mean, the fact that we're moving in that direction. This year in this election, running for Congress, you have 435 seats. Running for the Senate, you have 100, well, only 33 seats up this year, but you have essentially 468 seats that are being decided this year. We have 2,700 candidates running for those seats. You're looking at 6 to 7 candidates per race. That's the highest we've had since we've kept records. There's more Americans wanting to get involved and make things go right, and that's a healthy sign. You know, a lot of races we couldn't find anybody to run in the races. Now we're finding 5 or 6 or 7 people wanting to get in. That's a healthy sign. We're getting re-involved in our government. So I just see lots of good stuff going out there.
What do you think about the confirmation process for the nomination for the Supreme Court position?
Yeah,
opening up now.
It really has become it's something that is quite different. Originally, the confirmation process by the Founding Fathers was, are you competent? But we've now had to get into philosophy, because as a result of what we started doing in law schools in the 1920s, we've created 2 constitutions. And the question is now, when you confirm someone, which constitution do you support? Do you support the written one, black and white, or do you support the living one, which is what you want it to become? Yeah. And that is the debate that goes on, and it's a good debate to have. Because if you believe that America is unique because of the Constitution we have, you want to support that. But if you think America is a bad nation, we need to apologize for America and be like the rest of Europe, then you want a living Constitution. And just as people, it's really interesting, the people themselves don't believe much in the living Constitution. They believe in the written Constitution. Yeah. The political people believe more in the living Constitution than the written Constitution. So that's where you have a battle at confirmation time, is we the people keep saying to our leaders, hey, uphold the Constitution. It's written, it's black and white, it's simple. And they keep saying, oh, we don't like that one, we like the living one. And so when you get into confirmation, that's the battle you see going on. And you'll see that with Kagan. You're going to see the living Constitution guys versus the strict construction guys, the black and white document, and that'll be the battle. But it's a healthy battle, because it represents the 2 views that are out there in America. One needs to prevail, and the only way it's going to prevail is if we, the people, keep electing representatives who have that view, so that we can confirm people who have that view. Right now, because our leaders are out of touch with the people, we'll probably get someone confirmed that doesn't agree with what the people think about the Constitution, but that's the result of us not being involved in the process for the last 20 years.
Some people are getting involved.
We're getting involved now. I'm seeing great upsurges.
But what about the citizens? We have a lot of people running for office now who are going to try to get citizen involvement. Is it reaching our level? Is it reaching the grassroots, do you think?
It is. The voter turnout numbers are very high, very positive. In the last 18 months, what we've seen in special elections, what we've seen elsewhere, we had special elections even in Texas, where that our special elections were getting more than what the general elections got 2 years ago. I mean, there's more people turning out for weird time elections in the middle of the year and not an election date. So we're seeing high turnout, which is very positive. I'd love to see 100% turnout in the nation on an election. That's what it used to be, it was 100% turnout, because you were taught in school you have a duty to be involved in your government. Your government gives you lots of rights, but you got responsibilities to go with those rights. If you have the right to all the prosperity we enjoy, you got a responsibility to go vote and make sure you keep the right leaders. So we used to have 100% turnout.
100% turnout.
I love the race of 1832. Daniel Webster was running for office. In that race, there were 5,000 voters in his district, and 5,000 votes were cast in that race. I mean, that's what it was. So I see us heading back that direction on turnout, which is very healthy, very positive. Because again, we the people, we got a good set of values. It's just that our leaders haven't had. But then again, and I'm a Christian, when you have only 1 out of 4 Christians voting, and that's what we've had in the Christian community for the last 20 years, only 1 out of 4 Christians votes, you're not going to find those values reflected in Congress. And so that's what we've had, is when 3 out of 4 people who hold traditional values or religious values, when they don't vote, see, people are wrong. Congress never reflects the values of the nation. Congress only reflects the values of those who voted in the last election. And when people of traditional values don't vote, you can't complain about Congress not reflecting your values because you didn't vote. Well, now we're seeing the voting numbers go up, so that's really healthy. We're seeing the number of candidates go up. I mean, I'm just seeing involvement go up everywhere. I'm really encouraged with what I see across the nation.
Oh, that's so heartening. It's so heartening to hear. What about the churches? Are the churches becoming more involved?
You know, interesting, particularly up here in New England, where churches have been uninvolved for a while. For example, in New Hampshire, 10 years ago, if I did a pastor's briefing, I got 10 pastors, it'd be really good. Now we do a pastor's briefing, get 250 pastors at a briefing. Was in San Francisco. It used to be if you get 20 pastors, we got 400 pastors in San Francisco, 700 pastors in San Diego, got 700 pastors in Des Moines, Iowa. We just did an event in Cincinnati, 700 pastors in Cincinnati, 700 pastors in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. I mean, the church is getting involved in ways we haven't seen since the American Revolution. I love the fact that John Adams, when he was asked who's responsible for American independence, he started naming pastors. He didn't name all the patriots we talk about. He named pastors.
He was naming pastors?
He named Jonathan Mayhew and Samuel Cooper and Charles Chauncey and all these pastors. And we're starting to see that emergence again of pastors being leaders in their communities, getting people involved in all the things that are going on. And that's really healthy. And it doesn't violate separation of church and state. I know what people are thinking, oh, you can't have the church do it. No, churches have a right to be involved. Separation of church and state means the government can't control the church. Real simple stuff.
The government can't control the church, but the church still has the right to be a prophetic voice.
You've got the right to have the right of free speech, you've got the right of association, you've got the right of all the rights in the First Amendment. Separation of church and state does not stop any First Amendment right you have. Real simple.
Benjamin Franklin seemed to have been taken with George Whitefield.
He was. A number of the founders were. John Adams and Franklin both said without Whitefield you don't have the American Revolution. Particularly his father Abraham's sermon that got the colonies to come together. We'd been 13 nations before that. It was that Whitefield preached 34,000 sermons. He spent 32 years in America, made 7 missionary journeys. 80% of Americans heard Whitefield physically preach a sermon. Unbelievable. So if it hadn't been for Whitefield, according to the Founding Fathers, you don't have the American Revolution. So Whitefield is really key. And that's why John Adams and others would point to guys like Whitefield as being so important in the American Revolution. And church is starting to get back to that today, and that's good.
Well, look, I get the feeling that, and the sign that we're beginning to run out of time. What would you like to say to Rhode Island?
Get back and know our history again. Go Google books online now. Go read some old history books from before 1900. Read Charles Coffin's books on the story of America. See our history the way it was before we started editing it with political bias. And when you do that, find out who you are, man, you'll be thrilled with the country. You'll be thrilled with the good. We made mistakes, but we did so many things right. And we need to learn again about the positive things about our country. Get involved in the process, elect people who have a positive view of America, and let's be optimistic because we've got great opportunities ahead of us.
Looks like we have another minute. Well, very good. Let's talk about slavery. Some people say that America is bad and the Constitution was bad because it allowed slavery. What did the Founding Fathers have to say about slavery? 70%
of the Founding Fathers were abolitionists. And it was Great Britain who kept slavery in post. Right here in Rhode Island, your governor in 1774 abolished slavery, and the king vetoed that law. He said you can't do that. And that's why a number of the founders separated from Great Britain. They wanted to end slavery. So you'll find that after we separated, they started ending slavery. Now the South didn't, and all we get taught in the textbooks is about Southern slavery. You never get taught that the first black elected in America was 1768 in New Hampshire, Wentworth Cheswell. You never get taught that all over New England, blacks voted for ratification of the Constitution just like whites. In Baltimore, more blacks voted than whites voted in ratifying the Constitution. There never was a time in Massachusetts when blacks couldn't vote. You had black office holders, white office holders, so many of the battles of the Revolution won by black patriots. So we got a lot of good black history, we just never hear.
Él da esfuerzo alcanzado y multiplica las fuerzas al que no tiene ningunas. Los muchachos se fatigan y se cansan, los jóvenes flaquean y caen, pero los que esperan en Jehová, a Jehová, tendrán nuevas fuerzas. Levantarán alas como las águilas, correrán y no se cansarán.
"50 yards with the rifle, and that is pretty fine shooting."
It was September 2006. They packed up the truck and camper, took their